Moving into a new home is supposed to be exciting. Fresh paint, empty rooms, the smell of new beginnings. But sometimes, a house isn't as empty as it seems. Sometimes when the boxes are unpacked and the last light goes out, you start to notice things that weren't on the realtor's list. A door that opens by itself, footsteps in a hallway you haven't walked yet. Maybe it's just the old wood settling. Maybe it's your mind adjusting to a new place, or maybe you just moved into someone else's story and they never left. Tonight, we'll listen to 5 chilling moving day stories, each one told by someone who thought their new beginning would be normal ... until the house decided otherwise. So turn off the lights, put on your headphones, and let's begin. I moved into the house on a Thursday afternoon. It wasn't anything special, a 2-bedroom home on a quiet street, tucked behind rows of oak trees. I'd been looking for a place that was cheap but decent, and when this one popped up online for nearly half the normal price, I jumped on it. The owner told me the previous tenant had left suddenly, but didn't say why. The house wasn't in bad shape, just dusty and strangely cold, even in the middle of summer. The air inside felt heavier, like it hadn't been disturbed in a long time. The movers helped me unload everything, and by 6 p.m., I was alone, surrounded by boxes. I remember telling myself, all right, new chapter. Fresh start. I didn't know how wrong that was going to sound later. That night, I was unpacking dishes in the kitchen when I heard something fall upstairs. It was loud, like a box tipping over. I froze for a second, listening. The house went quiet again. I assumed maybe one of the stacked boxes shifted, so I ignored it. But when I went upstairs later, nothing had fallen. Every box was still sealed. The sound had come from the guest bedroom, the one I hadn't even stepped into yet. There was a faint smell in there, something like old rain-soaked wood. The air was colder too, enough to make me shiver even though the rest of the house was warm. I decided to close the door for the night. The next morning, I woke up to the door of that same room. Open. Not wide, just a few inches, like someone had peeked out. I clearly remembered closing it, but I brushed it off as my own forgetfulness. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that the house didn't want to be quiet. There was always something faint, a creak, a soft shuffle, the sound of a box being nudged. By day 3, the noises became more deliberate. Taps along the hallway wall. The faint click of a light switch, but no light came on. And sometimes, when I passed the living room mirror, I could have sworn the reflection lagged just a fraction of a second behind me. That weekend, I finally had some time to unpack the rest. As I was setting up the spare bedroom, I noticed something odd. Behind the radiator, part of the wall had been patched up, roughly, like someone tried to cover a hole in a hurry. The paint was different, slightly darker. Curiosity got the better of me. I gently tapped the wall, hollow. When I looked closer, I realized it wasn't fully sealed. Inside the gap was a small old photo frame, coated in dust. It was a picture of a family, mother, father, and a little boy. But someone had scratched out the boy's face completely, leaving deep gouges across the glass. I put it down immediately and backed away. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every few minutes I heard soft footsteps in the hallway, slow, steady, pacing between my room and the guest room. When I finally got up to check, the moment my feet hit the floorboards, the steps stopped. The following evening, I had a friend over to help me assemble furniture. When I told him about the noises, he laughed it off, until he went upstairs to grab a screwdriver from the guest room. He came back pale. He said he heard someone whispering from the closet, a soft "don't move." We both went to check, but when we opened the closet door, it was empty except for a small toy car on the floor. It wasn't mine. I threw it away the next morning. But by the time I came home from work, it was sitting on my kitchen counter. That was the breaking point. I called the landlord to ask about the house's history. At first he hesitated, then admitted that years ago, a family had lived there. but their child went missing and was never found. After that, the parents moved out, and the house had sat empty for nearly a decade. He said the last tenant complained about noises and toys showing up before he left overnight, leaving all his stuff behind. That night I didn't sleep. I sat on the couch, watching the hallway, waiting for something, anything. Around 2 a.m., the door to the guest room creaked open by itself. Then, the toy car rolled slowly out, stopping halfway down the hallway. The air turned icy. The faint sound of a child humming echoed down the hall, soft, tuneless, like someone trying to remember a melody they'd forgotten. I whispered, "You don't have to stay here." The humming stopped. The next morning, the guest room door was closed again. The toy was gone. I moved out a week later. The landlord didn't even sound surprised when I told him I was leaving early. I didn't ask for my deposit back, I just wanted out. Sometimes when I drive past that street, I can see the house through the trees. The curtains are always drawn. But once, I thought I saw something, a small silhouette standing by the window, watching the moving truck that wasn't there anymore. When I moved into my new place, I wasn't really looking for anything fancy. I just wanted quiet, a little space to myself after years of living with roommates. The house I found sat near the edge of a quiet neighborhood, old but well kept. The kind of place that still had wooden floors that creaked no matter how carefully you walked. It was perfect. Or at least, it seemed that way. Moving day was exhausting. By the time I got my last box inside, the sun had started to set, casting long shadows through the narrow hallways. I remember sitting on the floor, surrounded by half-open boxes, feeling this strange kind of peace. And then I noticed something. From where I sat in the living room, I could see a faint glow through one of the ceiling vents, like a soft yellow light coming from the attic. I hadn't gone up there yet. In fact, the landlord never even mentioned there was an attic. I assumed it was just sealed shut or used for insulation. I almost ignored it, but that light, it kept flickering. It wasn't a strong bulb or sunlight, more like the glow of a small lamp or a candle. Out of curiosity, I grabbed a chair, climbed up, and pushed open the attic hatch. It resisted at first, then gave with a soft pop. The light went out. When I shined my phone flashlight inside, all I saw was dust and empty space. Wooden beams, old insulation, nothing else. I climbed down, shrugged it off, and told myself maybe it was a reflection from the sunset. But that night, as I was unpacking in my bedroom, I saw it again. A faint light bleeding through the thin line where the attic door met the ceiling. And this time, it wasn't flickering. It was steady, constant. I tried to ignore it. Put on headphones, unpacked more boxes, focused on anything else. But the light wouldn't go away. Around midnight, I decided I'd just check it one more time, prove to myself it was nothing. When I climbed up again, there was no light, just silence. But the air up there felt wrong. It wasn't just cold. It felt like the air hadn't moved in years, thick and heavy. And then I noticed something else. In the dust covering the attic floor, there were footprints. Bare ones, leading from the hatch to the far corner. I froze. The dust was thick, nothing had disturbed it for a long time. Except for those prints. I climbed down slowly, trying to convince myself maybe they were old, maybe from the last tenant. But the next morning, when I looked again, they were gone, completely, like the floor had been swept. I called the landlord that day. He hesitated when I mentioned the attic. "Oh, the attic? You don't need to worry about that. Just keep it closed. It's better that way." I asked him why. He paused for a long time before saying, "It's just old insulation, loose boards, things falling down. Not safe, please keep it shut." I wanted to argue, but something in his tone made me stop. That night, the light didn't come on. And for a few days, everything felt normal again. Until one Thursday. I came home late from work. The house was dark, quiet. I dropped my keys on the counter, turned toward the living room, and froze. The attic light was on again, but this time it was brighter, and I could hear something faint, a soft rhythmic sound, like slow footsteps pacing above me. I stood there, every muscle tense, staring at the ceiling. Then it stopped. The light flickered once, twice, and went out. For the next few nights, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined someone walking quietly just above me, stopping when I listened. After a week, I'd had enough. I told myself I'd go up there in the morning, check every inch, take pictures, and demand an explanation. But that morning, the attic hatch was slightly open. Only about an inch, but it was enough. Enough to see the faint glow of that same soft yellow light, still shining, waiting. I didn't go up. I packed a few bags, called a friend, and left that night. When I returned 2 days later with the landlord to collect the rest of my things, the light was gone. The attic hatch was sealed with new screws. I asked him, "Did you go up there?" He didn't answer. He just stared at the ceiling for a moment, then quietly said, "Some things are better left closed." When I moved into my new apartment, I didn't expect anything weird. It was a small place in an older building, but the rent was cheap and it came fully furnished. I just started a new job, and this felt like a good, quiet beginning. The first few days were normal, unpacking, figuring out where to put things, trying to make it feel like home. It wasn't until the third night that I noticed something odd. I was watching TV, half asleep on the couch, when I heard a faint knocking sound. It wasn't from the front door, it was coming from the wall behind the TV. I muted the show. The sound stopped. I listened for a while, shrugged it off, and went to bed. The next morning, I woke up to find one of my framed pictures, the one I hung near that same wall, lying flat on the floor. The nail was still in place. The frame's hook hadn't broken. It looked like someone had lifted it off carefully and set it down. I started to feel uneasy, but told myself it was probably vibration from the heater or something. A few nights later, the knocking came back. 3 soft knocks, always the same rhythm, always from the same wall. Curiosity got the better of me, so I opened the building's digital floor plan that the landlord had emailed me before I moved in. The wall where I kept hearing the knocks was supposed to separate my living room from a small storage space. But when I went out to the hallway and checked the doors, there wasn't a storage room next to my apartment. There was just a blank stretch of wall. That didn't make sense. So the next day, I asked the landlord about it. He seemed distracted when I mentioned it. "Oh, that? Yeah, that section used to be a closet or something. We sealed it off years ago." "Why?" I asked. He hesitated. "Maintenance issues. Nothing you need to worry about." That night, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I stood in front of that wall for a long time, listening. It was quiet at first. Then, 3 soft knocks. This time, it was closer, almost like someone inside the wall was knocking back. I froze. My phone was still in my hand, flashlight on. The light caught something faint, a thin line near the baseboard, where the paint didn't quite match. A hidden seam. It looked like a door that had been plastered over. I stepped closer. My breath fogged in the air, even though the heater was on. When I put my hand near the wall, I could feel a faint vibration. Someone or something was on the other side. I backed away, trying to convince myself it was just old pipes or settling wood. But later that night, when I was lying in bed, I heard it again. Not knocking this time, whispering. Low, muffled, like someone was speaking through several layers of drywall. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was unmistakable, pleading. Then it stopped mid-sentence. I stayed awake the entire night, staring at that wall through my open bedroom door. The next morning, I called the landlord again. He didn't answer. Hours later, he texted, "Please don't touch that wall. There's nothing inside, just old structure. Leave it alone, nothing inside." Except, that night, I heard movement. A dragging sound, slow, deliberate, like furniture being pushed across a wooden floor. but my living room had carpet. I turned on every light, stood in front of that wall again, heart pounding. And then, from inside, 3 knocks. This time, followed by a single slow scrape along the baseboard. I packed a bag and left for a few days, staying at a friend's place. When I came back, everything looked normal. No sound, no movement, except the framed picture that had fallen before. It was back on the wall, perfectly straight. I never rehung it. I moved out a week later. A few months afterward, I passed by the building again, just out of curiosity. The section of wall where my apartment used to be. It had been completely sealed, covered with new drywall and paint. But for a split second, as I stood there in the hallway, I thought I heard it again. 3 faint knocks. Just enough to let me know whatever was behind that wall was still there. When I moved into my new apartment, I wasn't looking for anything fancy. It was small, clean enough, and cheap, which was rare for that part of town. I'd just gotten out of a long-term lease with friends and was ready for some quiet. The landlord seemed eager to hand over the keys, barely giving me a tour before saying, "Everything you need is already inside." He wasn't kidding. The place came partly furnished, a couch, a table, and 1 tall standing mirror against the bedroom wall. I remember thinking it looked out of place, too old compared to everything else. The glass had that faintly warped look, like antique mirrors you see in thrift stores, and its frame was painted black with tiny floral carvings. I considered moving it to the corner, but when I tried to drag it, it didn't budge, as if it was fixed to the floor. That first night, I barely slept. The apartment was quiet, but not comfortable. Every sound, the ticking of the pipes, the wind outside, felt amplified. I could hear my own breathing echo faintly in the room, and once or twice, I swore I heard a soft tap. Tap, tap, like something touching the mirror's glass. I turned on the lamp, nothing. Just my own reflection staring back, tired, uneasy, and surrounded by shadows that didn't quite match the shape of the room. Over the next week, small things started to happen. Objects I left on the dresser would be slightly moved, like my watch being turned in a different direction, or my toothbrush lying flat when I always left it upright. Once, I woke up to the faint sound of whispering. I thought it came from outside until I realized it was coming from the direction of the mirror. I told myself I was imagining it, moving stress, lack of sleep. But the next night, when I passed by the mirror before bed, I noticed something strange. My reflection wasn't in sync. There was a half-second delay, so brief you'd think it was a trick of light, except the reflection blinked just a moment after I did. That's when I stopped sleeping in that room. I dragged my mattress to the living room, but I still felt like someone was watching from behind the wall. A few days later, I decided to cover the mirror completely with a blanket. It worked for one night. Then around 3 a.m., I heard the sound of fabric sliding, slowly, deliberately, and when I turned on the light, the blanket was on the floor. The mirror stood uncovered, faintly reflecting my lamplight. But this time, the reflection didn't look quite right. The walls behind my reflection looked darker, and there was a faint outline of something standing in the corner. Not a clear shape, more like a smudge, as if someone had once pressed their face against the glass and left a mark. The next morning, I finally called the landlord. I asked if I could remove the mirror. He got quiet for a few seconds, then said, "I'd prefer if you didn't. It came with the unit." When I pressed him about where it came from, he just sighed and said, "The last tenant left it. They requested we keep it where it was." I didn't ask more. But that night, I packed my things and slept at a friend's place. When I returned the next day, the mirror was gone. Not broken, not moved, just gone. I asked the landlord again. He insisted he hadn't touched it, and that he didn't even have a spare key for my unit. He seemed genuinely confused. Before I left for good, I walked into that empty room one last time. Where the mirror used to stand, the wallpaper was faintly discolored, as if something had stood there for years. And when I leaned closer, I could see a faint outline on the floor, a pair of footprints facing the bed. You know how people say moving to a new place feels like starting over? For me, it didn't feel like that. It felt like stepping into someone else's life that had only just been left behind. I'd found the apartment online, a small furnished studio on the edge of town. It was clean, quiet, and came with everything I needed. The landlord said the previous tenant moved out in a hurry, but left most of the furniture behind, so I could use it if I wanted. I moved in on a cloudy Saturday morning. The place smelled faintly like lemon cleaner, but underneath that, there was another scent I couldn't place. Something old, stale. I was tired from hauling boxes all day, so I didn't think much about it. I unpacked, ate takeout on the couch, and by the time night fell, I was already half asleep watching TV. That's when I noticed something odd. On the coffee table was a single brass key I didn't recognize. It wasn't mine. I'd only gotten 2 from the landlord. This one looked older, heavier, and had a small tag on it with faded handwriting that read, "Closet." I assumed it must have belonged to the previous tenant. But when I tried it on the closet door near the entryway, it didn't fit. Neither did it work on the storage cabinet or the mailbox. Weird. But I tossed it in a drawer and forgot about it. That night, I woke up around 3 a.m. to a soft metallic sound. A click, like a lock turning. I sat up listening. Nothing followed, no footsteps, no movement. Just the faint hum of the fridge. When I checked the door in the morning, it was still locked. Over the next few days, little things started feeling off. The key I'd put in the drawer wasn't where I left it. My jacket, which I always hung by the door, was on the couch one morning. Once, I came home from work and found the TV on playing static. I started wondering if maybe someone still had a copy of the apartment key. When I mentioned it to the landlord, he brushed it off. He said the locks were changed last year and that no one else had access. That night, I set up a small camera app on my phone, pointing toward the front door while I slept. The next morning, I checked the footage. Nothing until around 2:47 a.m. There was a faint rattling sound. Then, the door handle moved, just slightly, then again, and then click. But the door didn't open. A few seconds later, I heard it. A quiet scraping sound, like something metallic being dragged against the floor. And then, faintly, from somewhere off camera, the sound of another door closing. The thing was, I didn't have another door. Just the main entrance, the bathroom, and that one closet that had never opened. That morning, I decided to try the brass key again. This time, I pressed harder and jiggled it. It turned. The closet door opened with a low creak. Inside was just a dark, narrow space. No shelves, no hangers, just a small, bare room I hadn't realized existed behind the wall. I shined my phone light inside and noticed something strange. The floor was dusty, except for a single set of footprints leading toward the back wall. They stopped there, and the back wall had a faint outline like a door, but no handle. I backed away slowly, heart racing. I closed the closet and locked it with the brass key. I didn't open it again. That night I stayed up late, trying to distract myself. Around 1 a.m., I heard it again, click. Then, 3 soft knocks from inside the closet, even though it was locked. The next morning the key was gone. I searched everywhere. The drawer, the counter, the floor, nothing. When I called the landlord again, he sounded irritated. He said no one had lived there before me except one man, a quiet guy who worked nights and left without notice. He paused for a long time before adding, he never turned in the spare key. We assumed he lost it. I never told him that I'd found it or that it had disappeared again. A week later, I moved out. I didn't break the lease. I just told him I wasn't comfortable staying there anymore. He didn't ask questions. Sometimes when I think about that place, I remember the faint sound that woke me that last night, the gentle turning of a key in the lock. And I wonder if, somewhere behind that wall, That hidden door finally opened,